Hello, welcome to the training on the Tribal Sexual Assault Services Program Semi-Annual Progress Reporting Form. The reports are due 30 days after the reporting period ends. So this means that for the January to June reporting period, the report is due on July 30th. The July through December reporting period has a report due on January 30th. So thank you for accessing our recording. We hope that this training enables you to provide the most detailed and accurate reporting for your grant-funded work on your semi-annual progress report. Accurate data reporting is important for so many reasons. Your quantitative and qualitative data enable VAWA's effectiveness to be measured. VAWA MEI creates reports for OVW using your data and data from grantees across the country. These summary data reports support OVW to make requests for increased appropriations and to defend VAWA funding for decision makers. Your data also helps OVW to make sure federal funds are being spent appropriately and to measure the performance of grant programs. Additionally, every 2 years, the Attorney General is required to submit a report to Congress on the overall effectiveness of VAWA funding. VAWA grantee data makes up a significant part of that mandated report. The more consistently grantees fill out their reports, the more accurately VAWA's effectiveness can be measured through these means. Here are a few tips before we look at the progress reporting form page by page. Please read the separate instructions you have downloaded with the progress reporting form. There are many helpful examples to assist you in filling out the reporting form. Throughout this form, there are other categories listed for many questions. In general, we ask that you use the other category only if you can't find another way to put the information into a category that already exists and is a close fit. When we aggregate data for reports, often responses in the other category will not get included in the report. However, there are some cases where other really is the only option to accurately capture what you are reporting, and that's okay. We just ask that you take the time to rule out all the other options first. Additionally, if you do not have an other to report, please leave the box blank. Do not report NA or not yet. Following most sections of the form, you're going to find optional narrative questions. Use these sections to talk about the unique successes of your grant-funded activities. Talk about the impact grant-funded activities made on your community or for survivors. These questions exist at the end of each section so that you can provide more detail about the work being done in each area that the hard data does not capture on its own. We encourage you to report in the optional narrative questions to help your program most accurately capture the work you are doing with grant funds. We ask that you try not to use acronyms or abbreviations in your data, but if you do use an acronym, please provide an explanation in each question where you use that acronym. Do not send attachments or extra documents containing data that is asked for in the report. Only data that is contained in the reporting form itself will be received and analyzed by VAWA MEI. And finally, please do not hesitate to call or email us for questions about your reporting form. We are here to help you at VAWA MEI. We will happily work through any scenarios or questions you have about your reporting form. So let's jump into section A1, Grant Information. In question 1, the date of the report is where you'll put the date you submit the report to OVW on GMS. Questions 2 through 4 will be filled in by the GMS system, so you cannot change those answers. In question 5, you're going to choose the organization that best describes the lead agency. Also take note that to the left of each question number is that question mark box. Information from the instructions for the TSASP Semi-Annual Progress Report will pop up if you click on those. There's information in there to help you fill out the question when you click on the question mark box. And question 6 is where you will report the point of contact. This is someone who knows the most about the day-to-day activities of the grant program. And this is the person that VAWA MEI will call and ask questions about the data is not necessarily the project director or fiscal agent, but is likely the project coordinator. In question 7, you're going to list out the specific tribes that you serve. So please do not use all tribes in our state or the use of etc. Neither of those are valid options in this question. Okay, the next section is section A2, staff information. When you're considering reporting staff, only report FTEs for staff whose salary is provided fully or partially by grant funds, and this does include staff time of contracted work. Report by activity performed rather than job title. If staff members fall into 2 or more categories, divide FTEs among applicable categories. Time should be prorated if necessary, such as when someone is part-time, was hired partway through the grant reporting period, is a contractor, or is a full-time employee but only partially funded by your SASP program funds. Only report out to the second decimal, so for example, 1.25 FTEs. Please use the other category very sparingly. For the most part, all activities performed by staff are included in the listed categories. If you do use the other category, please be very specific, and in the other descriptor, correlate each entry with an FTE amount. This is the FTE cheat sheet. This slide shows some examples to help you calculate FTEs for a 40-hour full-time work week. FTEs should be based on the 26-week or 6-month reporting period that is just ending. In 6 months, where a 40-hour full-time work week is the norm at your agency, there are 1,040 working hours possible. So let's go over a couple of examples. Your grant funds are used to fund one full-time victim advocate whose salary is 35% grant funded, and another full-time victim advocate whose salary is 50% grant funded. In this case, you would report only the percent of salary that is grant funded. The correct FTE under victim advocate would be 0.85, which you can see to the right in the example GMS. So that's 35% plus the 50%. Your grant funds a full-time employee who spent 16 hours a week coordinating the program and 24 hours a week providing counseling services for victims. In this case, you would divide the staff time by the function. The correct FTE under program coordinator would be 0.40 FTEs, or 16 out of 40 hours. Under counselor, you would put 0.60 FTEs to represent the 24 out of 40 hours. In example 3, 3 months into the reporting period, your program hired a 100% TSASP grant-funded administrative assistant who works 40 hours a week. In this case, you would need to prorate the FTEs to reflect the 3 months of the 6-month reporting period that the administrative assistant was employed. So for 3 out of 6 months, this person worked a full 40 hours a week and was funded 100% by your TSASP grant funds. So the correct FTE under support staff would be 0.50 FTEs, or 3 out of 6 months. All of these examples are filled in on the example GMS to the right here under question 8. That's how we calculated all of the FTEs for our example scenarios. Okay. In section B, purpose areas, you should check all the purpose areas that apply to activities engaged in with TSASP funds during the current reporting period. If you are not sure which purpose areas apply to your grant program, you should refer to your grant proposal. If some of your purpose areas have changed, you can check them in this question, but note that your program specialist must approve all changes to your purpose areas. In section C1, Coordinated Community Response, report all the agencies and organizations that you interact with, not just your MOU partners. Your participation in these CCR activities should be supported with grant funds. You're going to report on the frequency with which you provide or receive referrals, consultations, and/or technical assistance in column 2, the frequency of meetings in column 3, and the agencies or organizations with which you have a memorandum of understanding are in column 4 under collaborative partners. In section C2, policies, report only the protocols and policies on which development was completed during the current reporting period. If the policy or protocol is still in the development or revision phase, you should not report on it until it is actually finished. By substantially revised there in question 11, that means that you spent a good amount of time revising the policy or protocol. Simply adding in the name of another group under your underserved populations policy would not constitute as a revision unless separate protocols around how to serve the new group were included. In section C3, products, you would enter the number developed or revised, the title or topic, the intended audience, and the number used, not printed. If it was produced in another language, and you're going to identify the specific languages besides English. If you did not develop or revise a product in that reporting period, but you did distribute it, you fill out everything except the number developed or revised. Likewise, if you just developed it but have not distributed it yet, fill out everything except the number used or distributed. Okay, so next is section D, victim services. Most of the data requested in the victim services section is congressionally mandated by Congress. Congress wants to know how many of the number of victims or survivors were seeking services were served and how many could not be served. Provide information in this section that represents only those victims or survivors served, partially served, or not served who requested TSASP program provided services. So when you're considering reporting a victim or survivor, consider what services did the victim or survivor request or accept. The victim or survivor has to request or accept services before you would count them in this section. What services are you funded to provide under your TSASP grant? You're only reporting on the grant-funded requested services you provide, not services that you provide with other funding. Is the person a primary victim of sexual assault? The victim must be a primary victim of sexual assault to be served using TSASP grant funds. So when you're trying to decide if someone's served, partially served, or not served, sometimes it's a little tricky, and we're going to break it down right here. You're going to count a victim as served if they requested grant-funded services and your program was able to provide all of those services that they requested. You're going to count a victim as partially served if they requested grant-funded services, but because of programmatic issues such as those listed in question 16, your program could not provide all of the services that they requested. You're going to count a victim as not served if your program could not provide any of the grant-funded services the victim requested due to programmatic issues such as those listed in question 16. Before we go on, we want to make sure we take a moment to talk about partially served and not served victim or survivors. We find that grantees are often worried about reporting victims as partially served or not served because they fear that it will appear that they are not meeting their goals or objectives, or that it may shed negative light on their program. However, by reporting victims partially served or not served, grantees are helping OVW and decision policymakers understand the scope and burden of violence that stretches far beyond what VAWA is able to fund. OVW knows that VAWA funding is not enough to support every victim who requests services from grantees. Therefore, we want to encourage all of you to carefully track and report using both quantitative and qualitative data to highlight instances of partial or non-service. Narrative data can highlight long waiting lists for services or full emergency shelters or a program's inability to support victims on things such as family court days. The more detail you can provide helps OVW know that what that great need for services is out there. We know that need exists, so don't be afraid to highlight it. There are some victims who you will not be reporting on here. So those seeking services that are not funded by your SASP program grant should not be counted here. Victims and survivors who did not accept any of the grant-funded services that were offered or recommended should also not be counted. Those who are not primary victims of sexual assault should not be counted on this form because that is the requirement of the SASP grant, that the primary victim is of a sexual assault victimization. It's also very important to make sure that you are not providing a duplicated account. So victims reported are unduplicated counts and should be counted only once per reporting period. That doesn't mean that once you report on a victim in one reporting period that you can't report on them again in the next. You can report on a victim one time in each reporting period that they are served. So for example, a victim requested counseling at the beginning of the reporting period. They also came back at the end of the reporting period and requested civil legal advocacy. They should only be reported one time in question 14, but they should be reported once under each service that they were provided in question 19. Okay, I'm going to go over a couple of examples. So a victim calls your program looking for crisis intervention and group support. Both are funded by your SASP grant, and you provide crisis intervention, and she attends the support group. In this case, the victim received all of the grant-funded services that she requested and that you're funded to provide. This victim does get reported one time in question 14 as served. And then in question 19, you will report this victim once under crisis intervention and under counseling or support group. Okay. In example 2, your program offers crisis intervention and transportation under your SASP grant. A victim asks for these two services, but your program can only provide crisis intervention because the advocate is busy and unable to provide transportation. In this case, the victim received some but not all of the grant-funded services that they requested. The victim should be reported under question 14 one time as partially served, and in question 19, you will report that they received crisis intervention. In question 16, you're going to check off that the reason for them not being fully served was program unable to provide services due to limited resources and priority setting. So if we take a look to the right here at our example GMS, we've reported all three of our examples. We've reported these victims as served, partially served, or not served in question 14. And then if we scroll down, in question 16, for reasons of not being fully served, we've checked off that program unable to provide services due to limited resources and priority setting. If we keep going down, we've also added some demographic information for our example 1 and example 2 victims who are full and partially served, respectively. And in question 18, we'll have made up what victimization, what relationship to offenders that example 1 and example 2 victims would have disclosed. And then in question 19, we've filled in what services that they received in our example. For our third example, a woman is sexually assaulted and a police officer who responded to the incident has called your program's hotline on behalf of the victim, asking if an advocate will accompany her to the hospital during her exam. There is no advocate available to do this, and it is a service funded by your SASP grant. So in this case, you're going to report this victim as not served because they did not receive the grant-funded service that was requested. In question 16, if we come back down, again, the reason that you would check off for not being fully served was that the program unable to provide services due to limited resources or priority setting. So after the victim services question, question 20 is where you will report hotline calls, information, and referrals. Question 21 is where you'll report outreach to victims and survivors. This is unsolicited outreach to victims and survivors. And then question 22 is where you report any protection orders that are temporary or final, requested and granted. And in question 23 is that additional information text box that you're able to elaborate as much as you would like. If I scroll back up, right under question 14 where you're reporting on primary victims, question 15 is where you can report on secondary victims who are served. So you're only reporting secondary victims if they were indirectly affected by sexual assault, and you're also considering if they received grant-funded services. So secondary victims should be counted if they received grant-funded services, even if the primary victim did not receive grant-funded services. Okay. And that just about wraps up the victim services section. So in section E, where the narrative is, all grantees must fill out question 24 every time you report. Questions 25, 26, and 27 are reported on annually on the January to June reporting form. That's the one that's due by July 30th. Questions 28 and 29 are optional. You're going to use question 29 to provide any additional information about the submitted data, such as if you submitted 2 different reports for the same period, or you need to provide dummy data in a section in order to validate the form. That's a great place for you to tell us so that we can see it when we get the data. Narrative questions provide the opportunity for you to elaborate on the work that you're doing with your program funds. You can also elaborate on unfunded activities that are related to your overarching goals for this project. Once the form is completed, you must go to the last page of the form and click on the Validate button. The validation process will highlight any missing or incomplete information that asks you to return to the form to review or change the data. So when this happens, you may see one of 2 warning messages, those first 2 at the top of the slide. That first one with the red X, you'll receive this type of message, which means you are missing some of the required information. If you want to fix this error now, you'll click yes, and it will take you back to the exact question on the form that you need to work on. If you click no to continue with validation, just remember that you're not going to be able to finish the validation process until you fix this validation error. That second type of warning with the yellow exclamation point indicates that something on the form looks like it might not be right. So you don't have to go back and correct the form to successfully validate when you see this yellow exclamation point, but it doesn't hurt to take a look. If you want to review the field, you click on the yes button, and it'll bring you back to the exact question on the form to look at. If you click no, you can continue with validation. So after you've corrected or completed any information that was missing, you're going to return back to the bottom of the form and press validate again until all sections of the form are complete. You will receive a third warning message, which is actually not a warning message. It's that last one on the bottom of the slide that indicates validation success. So at this point, your form has been successfully validated, and you are now able to submit it through GMS. So here are some of the things you'll be able to find for resources or information if you visit our website. The link is right there on the slide, and our agency is named VAWA MEI, which stands for VAWA Measuring Effectiveness Initiative. There are sample progress reporting forms available, instructions, training materials. The reports to Congress are available for viewing. There are summary data reports, which includes SASP. That includes aggregated data by grant programs in charts and tables. So hopefully it's viewer friendly, and you're welcome to give us a call to ask how to find that. Okay. If you have any questions going forward and you need some assistance via email or phone, you're welcome to call us at VAWA MEI. You could reach out to your OVW program specialist, and that number is on the screen. It's 202-307-6026. And then if you need to reach out to the GMS support line, that's 1-866-655-4482. And that's the end of the training. So thank you so much for listening, and hopefully that was really helpful for you, and you're always welcome to reach out for more questions and support. Thank you.